I think that'll be fine as well. But, it's interesting because it brings to me a story. I've been in learning and development about 20 years. I'm trained as a social and organizational psychologist. But it was probably about 7 or 8 years I really decided, after having been a generalist, that I wanted a niche down in the area of team coaching. And I had been working with teams for a long time, but never like executive coaching where you have a relationship with somebody over maybe 6 months or a year. I didn't have that kind of experience with teams, but I could see more and more as we were shifting more and more to team-based structures that the one and done team building events weren't going to be enough to create great teams. So I really dove into team coaching. And interestingly, I've been trained in like a half dozen approaches to team coaching, but the first one was called the Team Advantage out of North Carolina. DJ Mitch, who was a former president of the ICF many years ago. And what was interesting about this approach to team coaching is that following a 2-day launch retreat, so there was a whole kind of wind up and setting up, there was a weekly team coaching call over teleconference. This is like 6-7 years ago. 1 hour a week, 12 sessions over a 16-week period. So roughly once a week. It was all done on teleconference, no Zoom, no Post-its, no mural, none of that dynamic stuff. And I have to say, in some ways, I think there was something really powerful of a low-tech solution, not just high-tech solutions, to be able to do team coaching. And I think one of the powers, and many of you probably have the experience of coaching only over the phone, is that it enables you to listen in and maybe even close your eyes and to really listen in and connect in a different way. And so anyways, we're going to roll with the technology curveball that was thrown at us today and, do this with just, a Zoom line, and I'm not going to be able to share screens or anything. But I just go back to that example of the 12 sessions. I was really struck how in 1 hour sessions, once a week over 12 weeks, we could really coach a team to become, by the end of it, self-coaching, accomplish an extraordinary business objective. And, a lot of great things could happen in that time period. So I think what's interesting is going full circle, now that we're in the COVID environment, the last 4 months, like all of you probably, I've had to pivot to 100% virtual team coaching. A lot of the same principles apply. So it's shorter sessions rather than the half day, 1 day, 2-day kind of sessions, but now it might be 45 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 hours. Sometimes I do 3-hour sessions. I try to advise against that. But, we just keep having to adapt in different ways. And I think that's part of the challenge, but also the beauty of getting to work with teams and all that. So anyways, pleasure to be with you guys today. I'm really passionate about team coaching. Like Vanya said, I started this podcast about 6 years ago. My goal was to do 100 episodes, and I finished that off a little more than a year ago, and passed the podcast to Krister Lowe, who has it continuing. And now I'm into a new podcast called the 6 Conditions podcast. And just living the dream in this space of team coaching. And I'm a little technology geek, so I like podcasting, video, using online tools and technology. So happy to, get into that conversation today.
Awesome. Thank you. That was a lovely intro. And tell us about the 6 conditions before we move the conversation further. What is the difference?
Actually, maybe what I would share is my approach to team coaching now, which is really an amalgam of a number of different influences. And, I really am grounded, along my podcasting journey, I got to interview people like Peter Hawkins and David Clutterbuck and DJ Mitch and Ruth Wagaman and, Phil Sandahl, the late, great Phil Sandahl, and many other kind of, legends in the team coaching industry. And so along the way, I was, taking their courses and just building great relationships. And I think somewhere along the way, 37 or 39 episodes in, I interviewed Ruth Wagaman, and that led to a wonderful partnership around the 6 conditions. And I started using this framework in the team diagnostic survey. And that has really become a core part of my practice. That framework really emphasizes that before you can even try to coach a team, that really what's very helpful is to put in place an ecosystem or a set of design conditions that really sets a team up for coachability or even for success, right? And so it's a model and a framework that really is emphasizing the structural conditions that drive behavior. And so a lot of times we get called in as team coaches because teams are struggling, they're dysfunctional, or maybe there's a big transition coming up, a team leader has taken over a team. And we end up attending a lot to the symptoms of interrelational dynamics or personality dynamics. And what the sixth condition says is before you go there, let's dig back a few layers deeper and really look at the design of the team around why does it need to be a team? Who are its stakeholders? What's its purpose? Does it have agreed upon norms and ways of working? And when you put those in place, then you actually have the conditions ripe to then help the team accelerate through coaching. So I kind of ground a lot of my work in that. Sometimes it involves also measuring the team on the team diagnostic survey, which is a scientific and validated instrument. But that's kind of where I start. So really grounding in good team design and structure, I would say. But then I have some other influences. So systemic team coaching, Peter Hawkins' work has been a big influence on me. Along the way, as I was podcasting, I learned more and more about the Agile movement and software development, which I think is a real parallel, which are kind of in some ways ahead of us and behind us in other ways in terms of the mainstream team coaching field. But, team coaching or these Agile principles, which are really about self-managing team coaching approaches, right? Scrum and Kanban. I started learning about those. And so I kind of folded in that into my practice as well. I've been a fan of the embodiment work that I learned. I was trained in the Coaches Training Institute and learned about what we call geography and physical movement. So I started getting teams moving physically in my sessions. So I'm kind of a fan of embodiment. And then now I would say because of COVID, I've had to really quickly, get versed in how do we turn Zoom sessions into more dynamic, sessions. So I've become a real fan of Mural. And it's been wonderful. I think in some ways COVID has been a real blessing. It totally wiped out all my team coaching work for about a month or two, but now it's all coming back. And I'm actually really excited about what COVID is teaching us about why team coaching is still relevant, but maybe some of the adaptations we need to do around use of technology, but also how do we sequence our work in chunks that are maybe more frequent but shorter. And actually, I think that dovetails really nicely with the Agile practices around cadences and rhythms. And so yeah, anyways, that's a little bit of a tangent, but that's what's happening these days for me around this work.
Awesome. So I think
you asked specifically about the 6 conditions, but I think maybe I answered it enough. Yeah.
Yes.
Unless there's more you want to know.
No, that's a very great answer. And you gave a little bit more of what I expected, which kind of relate to the question that Camera Action asked in the chat box. What are the top 2 team coaching programs or frameworks that, Krister, you're seeing are most effective?
Well, again, that probably varies different team coaches. I've been trained in like 6 of them, right? So it's the 6 conditions, again, for me is kind of the main one. I think what I like about the systemic team coaching approach is it emphasizes a little bit more the team's relationship to the stakeholder context. So I like to call the 6 conditions a little bit of more of an inside out than an outside in view. And systemic team coaching is a little bit more starting with the context and then backing into the team. I think there's some overlap between those 2 frameworks, but I think they shine a little bit differently. So I think for me, those are 2 in the mainstream team coaching world that I would dig into. But then, again, for me, the Agile stuff comes in, but, others might go after team coaching internationals, positivity and productivity. It's a classic task relationship, 2x2 kind of framework. The ORSC, approach, the systems, the relationship systems model there is another one. I spoke about team advantage earlier, which I think was a really powerful, great first approach to team coaching because it gave me kind of like a structure for 4 months, like how to help a team accomplish one big goal, but breaking that down into 12 sessions. So it was a really great place to start because if any of you have coached teams, that once you get past the initial assessment and team building launches and all that, it becomes a little bit more like sailing in uncharted waters where you can't see the shores anymore. And there's not a lot of structure out there, right? And so you have to make up structure along the way. And I think as you get more experience, your need for structure becomes less. But as a new team coach, having a little bit of a step-by-step playbook really helps a lot. And so I think that the team advantage was a great place for me to begin. And I've taken some principles from that now and, morphed it into my own approach. I've also studied with David Clutterbuck. I love David's stuff on learning teams. So anyways, I think those are like a half dozen, influences on me. And I think
Plenty.
What I would say though, I think it's really helpful to ground in a team effectiveness framework first, because whether you pick the 6 conditions or the 5 disciplines of high performing teams or the 2x2 model from Team Coaching International, I think it's good to have a grounding in a framework, because then what you can do is teach teams a language, and then you can scaffold from there and add ornaments from all the other approaches that you find valuable, right? I know it can be overwhelming to have 5 or 6 different models and frameworks and tools all circling around in your head, but I think maybe a good place to begin is to have an anchor in one framework. Mine is the 6 conditions. I really like that one because of the research behind it. And, I think there's something powerful about structural design conditions that kind of is something that resonates with me, but, maybe for others, there other models and resonate with them. And I do believe that all models aren't equal in terms of their efficacy and validity and all that. But I think a good team coach, like a good tennis player, can win with any kind of racket, whether you've got the best racket or a pretty good racket. I think the models and the instruments and all that are only as good as we can bring life to them and breathe life in. And that's more about the art side of this work, right? There's the science side of this work, and then there's the art and the intuition. And a lot of the great stuff we learn as one-on-one coaches is really valuable. It's, how to use your body as an instrument when you're with teams to sense what's there, what's needing to happen, and going off script, right? And so, that's how I would answer that question. So I think in my view, I have my own view about which are the top team coaching models, and maybe others have different views on that. But
absolutely. And I think the most of the science is built upon the science and research on one-on-one coaching and human development as an individual. And then the expansion.
Well, that's interesting. If you mean by coaching, perhaps, I think in terms of team effectiveness, that's a whole body of knowledge that people have been studying for like 50 years, that in some ways predated coaching as an industry. So I think what's interesting about team coaching, which is my area, is there are different conduits to come here. So there's the whole Agile movement. And actually, in some ways, if you look at the number of Agile practitioners out there, Scrum Masters and all that, they dwarf us as team coaches. I don't know how many team coaches we have in mainstream team coaching, maybe 50 or 100,000 around the world, but there are hundreds of thousands, maybe even 1 million Agile practitioners out there. So, Agile is a huge river that feeds into the ocean of team coaching. I think the coaching world, executive coaching, ICF and all that, we're now seeing, team coaching is being mentioned for years in the ICF community, right? And then there's the whole organization development and learning field that have been on the team's route for a while, right? And then interestingly, I think organizational design, startup culture and all that also has the big emphasis on teams. So there's I kind of look at it as different rivers or streams that catch people along the way. And maybe we come from different backgrounds, but we're all swimming in this great big ocean of team coaching. Yeah.
Yes.
And we have a lot to learn from each other, right? I think is the other thing I would say.
Absolutely. If you're open to learn. And I also think that kind of the conversation around team became more valuable and more centered around how you make this effective in the last year or so in the role of team coaching. Maybe this only me, but I kind of see overflowing information about effective teams, high team performance, and et cetera, et cetera. But what is the role of technology in that? How you integrate? What kind of integration? The connections are breaking. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think you froze a little. Oh, you're still. Yeah, I think. Am I back? Okay, cool. So it's interesting because I actually think technology has been one of the biggest catalysts for the rise in team coaching. And if you look at the book, The Age of Agile, which was written just a few years ago by one of the proponents of the Agile movement, one of the arguments he makes is if you look at all the top companies of the world, many of them been in this spotlight in terms of market cap and all that, Facebook and Amazon and Google, all of these companies have been built on the backbone of agile teams, and their software is a big part of it, right? And so the agile movement, which started about 20 years ago, really came out of the software development field, because because of the speed of technology, what became apparent was that throwing more money and people on big software projects actually had the opposite effect that you would think it would do. It ended up slowing down projects rather than speed them up. And so what these folks in technology realized was that the only way they were going to get software developed faster was to change the management structure, that it was the organization of people, not the technology and money, that was going to accelerate the process. And so the agile movement was born, which really looked at how do we organize work in ways that are more flatter, more decentralized, more around self-managing teams, and get the leadership and authority structure out of the way to let teams who are the closest to the work really work at a much faster speed. So I think, just to start off the conversation, Vanya, I think it begins with technology, because our world is becoming a hybridized world. And now I think COVID is even more. When you look at all the companies that are exploding in terms of stock market right now, it's all tech companies, because all the working from home, schooling at home is causing huge demand for more chips, for more cloud, more software. And so I think it's kind of interesting that it all begins with technology as the driver. And, I think for me, that's where, all of this begins. And then I think, as part of that becomes, how do we actually continue to adapt? I mean, I remember when I started using Zoom, I don't know how long ago, it's been like 8 years ago. I remember when I started as a trainer in my work, and it used to be like 3-day trainings, and then trainings went to 2 days, and then a day, and then a half day. And then it was like 2-hour sessions, and then it morphed into webinars, right? So we have to do three-part webinars, and we all moved into Adobe Connect and to WebEx, and then Zoom was born. So I remember back in the day how painful it was to move from being a classroom-based trainer to now running trainings online. And that's when I started to exit training, because I was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, if that's the way it's going to be. And I moved into the team space, and now we're seeing the new iteration of that. But new technologies are getting born. I think COVID is forcing us to learn how to be more dynamic, right? That just being in a Zoom session with breakouts is one level of, facility. But now with things like Mural, Miro, these visual team collaboration platforms, what we've been finding is anything we do in the classroom or face-to-face setting, we can now do virtually with visual collaboration technologies. But even embodiment, getting people to stand up, turn on cameras, turn off cameras, do meditations and all that. We're kind of playing with all of those things. And honestly, they work equally as well. And I'm actually feeling like after this, whether we're on lockdown for another year or two, or how long it's going to be, I don't think we're going back to the old ways of working. I think maybe we'll have some face-to-face again, but I think we will have embraced the technology more. We will become more comfortable with it. And, it's just like Mural. I started using Mural 4 or 5 months ago, and the muscle was very weak, but now I've used it like 100 times with tons of teams, and I love it, and my teams are loving it. And, it's kind of hard to imagine doing team coaching now without Mural anymore, right? Anyways.
Can you say a little bit about Miro and Miro? In Trello and other platforms. I also use them, but people were asking, can you give a little bit more information around that?
Yeah.
And I know
I was going to show you guys today Mural, but the tech didn't work out, of course, right? Murphy's Law. That's the way it works. But yeah, so these are basically like online team collaboration platforms. And think of it as like just a canvas. There's like a white canvas or a whiteboard. And you can make this board as big or as small as you want. You can zoom in, and you can have text there. You can have Post-its. You can bring images in. You can embed files, PowerPoint files, or screenshots into this. You can draw in it. And everybody basically gets a link. You go in there and you can create together. And so it really enables a level of collaboration and co-creation that's difficult to do when you're just in Zoom with a whiteboard, right? So it enables a lot more dynamic kind of sessions. So to give you an example of that, I recently Ruth Wagaman and I have been coaching a COVID-19 respiration unit. So a hospital system in Boston stood up a COVID unit with about 18 physicians and nurses and medical staff. And they were seeing like something like 2,000 COVID patients in the last couple of months. And they were at a great break in their cycle. And they asked us to come in to help them with some coaching before their next phase of work, because now that they've kind of stabilized a little bit, their whole COVID operation, they're running on adrenaline for like 2 months. They were aware that that way of working wasn't going to be sustainable anymore. Now, this team is so busy, we can only get them for 45 minutes every Friday at 8 in the morning. So they have 2 team leaders co-leading this team of 18, 20 medical staff. And so we met on Google Hangouts every Friday for 6 sessions, once a week for 45 minutes on Google Hangouts, and then with Mural. They had never been in Mural before, so we just sent them a link, and no training in Mural, nothing. We just had them show up in Mural. Most of the team was sitting in the COVID clinic with masks on. Some were, dialing in from home. They were off shift. And in our first session, all we did was have every team member say their name and a word that captured where they were just that day coming into the session, about life, about COVID, about starting this team coaching work. We did that to just get to know everybody for 5 or 10 minutes. And then using Mural, we had a 2x2 board up, and we did a little retrospective, a look back, using an agile practice called the 4 L's. And so the 4 L's are looking back on the last few months. What did you like about the way you worked as a team? What was a learning? What did you learn? What was lacking in your ways of working? And what are you longing for moving into the next phase? And so in Mural, we set up this 2x2 with the 4 L's, one for each quadrant. And then in Mural with Post-its, different color Post-its, we put a timer on. We said, everybody just individually for 5 minutes, go ahead and type Post-its, your reactions to this question in the 4 quadrants. And so here they are silently. We're helping the ones who are struggle, or they're in the chat window typing in, and we were being a proxy for some of the team members. And within 5 minutes, we had a whole 2x2 populated with all these Post-its around liked, learned, lacked, and longed for. And then we zoomed in closer into the liked box, and we just had a discussion about that for 5 or 7 minutes. We then moved to the second box, the learned box, explored what was there, and we went through the 4 boxes. And that wrapped up our 45-minute session. And that was enough to really added a huge amount of value, because they never had a place really to pause and actually just take stock of how far they came, and some successes. There was some healing because there was a lot of stress on this team during that period of time. And that earned our rights for us to then come back the next week. And in the next week, we did a session on stakeholder mapping. So using little round Post-its, we developed a stakeholder map of their key stakeholders. And then we did a little bit of role play coaching, having them actually role play their key stakeholders. That was really powerful, because right after the session, the 2 co-leads who we were meeting in between the team coaching sessions for about an hour a week immediately went off and had some strategic conversations with their stakeholders, immediately got value out of the coaching. In the 3rd session, we came back, introduced them to the 6 conditions model, an example of a team diagnostic survey. And then we had the team leaders present a compelling purpose draft and get feedback from the team, and using the Mural to capture feedback on Post-its again. In the 4th session, we ran the team diagnostic survey in between sessions 3 and 4, and we took snapshots of the report and brought it into the Mural so they could see their results. And we had a real rich dialogue about the team diagnostic survey in session 4. These are all 45-minute sessions. And then finally, we moved on to helping them in sessions 5 and 6 really look at, given that their world was so dynamic and they could only see about 2 weeks ahead at any given time, we started to get them into a rhythm and cadence of 2-week sprint cycle. So this comes out of the Agile world, and help them develop a before action review of the handful of mission critical things they needed to accomplish strategically as a team in the next 2 weeks. And then also identify the handful of norms and work practices that would really help them succeed. And then we came back in the sixth session and did an after action review to review that and take stock of learnings and help them develop a new before action review. And so in 6 sessions, 45 minutes each, and then with team leader coaching in between, that team is totally rebooted. They have a new purpose. They're really clear about what they need to do as a team. And they're engaging in iterative cycles of learning and now self-team coaching, because they're starting to team coach a little bit. We've left them alone for about a month, 6 weeks now, I think. And now the team leaders are reaching out again, saying, I think we're ready for another session. So what I love about this story, for me, it was totally emergent. We didn't have this all scripted out. We just went from session to session. Now looking back on it, it was obvious, you know, the steps we went through. But for me, the gift of this was, how do I coach a team in 45 minutes a week, 6 45-minute sessions? And I have to tell you, I think having experienced that, I feel like we've covered more territory in these 6 weeks than I have ever done with these big wind-ups of interviewing all the team members, you know, 2-day launch retreats, all that kind of stuff. This was like quick, you know, there's no time for all of that setting the table stuff. And if you can do that, that's wonderful. But I think it really challenged a lot of my assumptions about what's possible in a fully virtual environment, and how just having Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever, you know, platform you use, plus a visual collaboration tool, you can do amazing things in a short period of time.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
tell a little bit about, you mentioned the diagnostic survey, but tell our participants a little bit about assessments. What are the most trendy ones, the most effective ones, and where their place is in the process?
Yeah, so I would say, you know, one of our taglines in the 6 team conditions is the science and art of great teams. So we think that it's really helpful as team practitioners or when working with teams is to really bring everything to bear on that team, and digging into some science of some validated models and frameworks and maybe diagnostic measures, along with the artful facilitation of being able to be dynamic, using embodiment, using visualization. All this stuff is really critical to working well with teams. So I think on the science side, we think it's helpful, and it goes back to my earlier comment around picking a team effectiveness framework to ground the team and help the team develop a common language of what is actually an effective team. What are the drivers or the things that really influence team effectiveness? There's, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 things, whatever out there that you think are the magic levers that most drive team effectiveness. And if you've done that, then I think assessing a team as a baseline can be really helpful, because there's something about the power of data that appeals to certain people's ways of thinking. Some people love data, love the objectivity, or the seeming objectivity. Because even if you measure something, you know, there's arguments about how good your measure is and how much your measure is measuring the real thing and how much of it's measuring noise, but that's a matter of psychometrics. But there's something about grounding when a team is looking at the data together rather than at each other through their roles and relationships. It enables a little bit of distance using a reference, an objective reference like a framework, from which to get some feedback and to start a process of learning and change. And I think there's some real value in that. In the 6 conditions, we can't use the TDS, the Team Diagnostic Survey, with brand new teams, because they have to cover some ground together. Even if it's a month of time together to log some hours, the questions aren't going to be relevant to them. We can use the 6 conditions framework to help them with the design of their team, putting in place the 6 conditions. But, you know, we can't measure them until they've covered some territory. But oftentimes you get teams, I get a lot of teams that have already been formed. Maybe they're going through a change with a new leader or a reorganization, and we can measure them right out of the gate. And I think that can be a really helpful grounding experience. And then with the Team Diagnostic Survey, we have like a full-blown survey. And then we have a pulse check, which takes 2 to 3 minutes on a mobile device. And you can get the main measures, 22 items, using that instrument. The full-blown survey takes like 20 minutes or so to complete and provides a much more rich reporting and a whole bunch of supplemental stuff and qualitative feedback. the pulse is great because we can continue to track the team's progress over time, and that can be very valuable. And so we offer that to teams like in a little dashboard so they can see their progress over time through repeated measures. And one of the beauties of that is if you have before and after measures of your team coaching work, like I'm just finishing up with an IT leadership team of a children's hospital, and I've been coaching them for 10 months. I ran the full test in last August. I just ran a follow-up test in June, and you could see dramatic differences. And in between were 9 months of team coaching sessions, a mix of 1 hour, 90-minute, 3-hour sessions over the course of the 9 months. And you could really see the change. And the CIO of that IT leadership team, she leads 500 people in IT in their hospital system. It's a wicked case study now because now they can go out, they're cascading and scaling this to all the teams. They're using the team diagnostic survey and the 6 conditions, but they have a case study now showing why this kind of investment, which isn't cheap, why it's powerful and why it's valuable. And they've got metrics in addition to the story, right? So the data and the assessments show the numbers, but there's also a qualitative story of transformation that, through interviews and just a write-up you can capture. So I think that's the value. And, I think for many teams and team leaders, it's a good place to create some safety, even though by showing data, there's some vulnerability in that. I think it ultimately does create some objectivity, and there's always something good in any team to build on. And so that usually becomes an assessment.
We will take a question from Lori here, I think is relevant. Are you able to introduce Miro and get people able to use it in a 45-minute segment?
Yeah, we did. So what I've been doing now is I actually have gone onto Miro's website and into YouTube, and there are lots of introduction videos and long ones. I even just for a recent client, I created my own 5-minute introductory video specifically for them.
Yeah.
And and that's been another great use of technology. What I'm finding now is because the environment, like virtually, and people are zoomed out, right? They're on Zoom calls all day long. So I've been trying to do like 90-minute team coaching sessions. I did the 45 minutes because that was that team. I had to adapt to that team. I'm now trying to do 90 minutes to 2 hours. Like if I'm relaunching a team, it's like 4 90-minute to 2-hour sessions. And what I've been trying to do in advance is to give them short videos. Like I did a thing, it comes out of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. There's a guy there named Marshall Gans. And he does a whole thing around the use of storytelling in community organizing. And we've adapted that for use with teams. So I had them in our second session do some storytelling because they weren't very safe as a team together. Their psychological safety scores were really low in the team diagnostic survey. And in the first session, we did TDS feedback. We did a retrospective and all that, but it felt very, they were still in their heads. And you could just feel that it was the tip of the iceberg. And there was a whole big thing underneath the water emotionally going on in the team. So I decided in the second session to focus on storytelling. I did a group mindfulness exercise at the beginning. It was one of my favorite exercises. But anyways, I then pivoted them into a storytelling. And in advance, I sent them a YouTube video by Marshall Gans. It was a 16-minute video. And I said, if you can, watch this before you come. It'll teach you a little bit about narrative and why we're going to be using this methodology. And the majority of them watched it. So, I think what I'm finding in the virtual environment is, in addition to using technologies like Miro, a little bit more assignments and homework for the teams.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a task. Like I started this team in a before action review in session 3 just the other day, but we didn't get through the whole thing. But I said, okay, we started this. Now your homework is before you can call me back for your next session, you have to complete this before action review and run it for a couple of weeks and make some progress. And then when you're ready, call me up and I'm ready. I'll be ready and waiting for you guys for your 4th session. So I put that onto them, and then, I can give them a YouTube video here or there or create one. I've been creating a lot of videos because we, in the 6 conditions, we've been training team coach practitioners, and we had to cancel all of our classroom-based trainings and pivot those into, webinar-based sessions. But I've been using a platform called Teachable, which is a great course building website and shooting lots of videos to make blended learning, experiences where there's a little bit of offline study, and break it down into modules. And then you come for a live session where we practice, we use Mural and all that. And I'm thinking the same thing for teams, being comfortable creating little audio pieces like audio recording, right? Everybody has a computer. Anybody can get a decent microphone for $60 or $70 or $80. You can get some software. One of my favorite software is called ScreenFlow, which for $100, you can record videos on your computer, get a good webcam. For a couple $100, you can create an awesome home, production. You don't need thousands and thousands of dollars, and create little portals for your teams. And, one of the beauties of Mural, I'm just kind of skipping all over the place here, is that with Mural, if you organize the canvas well, you can have one workspace for the team to come back session after session, and all the work is there. It promotes transparency. I have moved from Trello now, which was my digital Kanban, to doing Kanban in Mural, because with Post-its and grids and all that, you create
tables, you create
Kanban
the
boards.
sense of tables.
So and all the work is in one place, and you can embed documents and everything, right? Which is kind of cool for a transparency, and the work, then the purpose, all those things are in everybody's faces. They don't ever have to lose it because it's all there. They just have to scroll over and look, right?
Yes, and keep it for the record with all the assessments and everything that you're tracking a progress with. Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing the video with us, the 60-minute videos with Marshall that you sent to the team?
The 60-minute video or the 5 or 6 minute video?
Well, I heard 60 minutes video that you gave us as an assignment.
Oh, 16 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
1/6. That was Marshall Gans. It's on YouTube. Yeah. I can try to remember to send it to you after this call. Yeah.
I will remind you, and we will forward that to everybody on the call. And a question about, is there any platform that you recommend for team coaching? I don't know any platform specifically developed yet, but if you know, please share with us, and then we're going to move the conversation a little bit like in a different direction.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. You could make Trello, for example. If you don't know what Trello is, Google and go watch some videos about it. I have used Trello prior to COVID as like kind of a one-stop shop for the teams I'm on. But also have introduced Trello to teams as a technology to use if they're not co-located, especially. And even if they are co-located,
the connection
if they're traveling, it can be helpful to have a
Krister, the connection is very bad. We can't hear you.
Okay.
I think you're back now.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Where did it drop off?
At the moment you start talking.
Okay. So I think what I was saying is like you can use Trello as a soup to nuts platform, very easy to capture the different phases. And like when I break down team coaching, I think of it as like an assess phase, a build phase, and a coaching phase. And in Trello, you can configure the phases like that. You can put in documents. You can have all the teams work there. So I think Trello is a basic solution. I've been using Teachable, which is really designed to be a course site. But again, you could create your own portal to house the team's work and upload videos, documents, all that kind of stuff in a format, in a course style portal format. And Trello's awesome. Teachable's awesome. It's very stable. You can get an iOS app for it, and that works really well. Mural, relatively low tech. You could actually have a whole 6-month, 9-month engagement on one Mural canvas if you manage the space well. So I think there are different kinds of technology solutions. Now, if you want to go crazy, I think I interviewed this guy, Tom Marsden from Sabre. And I don't know if you've interviewed
Yes,
Tom
he was my guest last time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there you're kind of getting more into an artificial intelligence approach, but that one provides a bit more of a interesting step-by-step directiveness to teams using technology, but doesn't totally get rid of team coaches. I think it's to enable scaling and covering more teams. And there's a fair enough similar things that you do with every team that stuff can be automated. Right. And I think that's where AI is going to continue to play more and more of a role. I think the science side of this work, doing the assessments and the feedback and the launches and getting clear about design, a lot of that stuff can be automated to a certain degree. Even you can offload good learning exercise or self-team coaching exercises. So depending on the groups, not all teams are there, I have to say. Not all teams are that comfortable just using technology, downloading an exercise and running it themselves. That requires a certain level of, the vertical development as well as horizontal development, right?
Yeah.
And so depending on where the team is, their level of self-management, their level of self-team coaching, they can more or less do a lot automated. And then I think that's where we come in as team coaches, that we can bring more of the artful side, help them with the tougher things that really need professional level facilitation and coaching. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the dance of the blend of technology and coaching. It's going to continue to just keep going together. In some ways, maybe the technology will automate some of the parts of the process that, again, are where our value may not be as great as we think it is. And our value will become more shining in the ongoing coaching of teams, because it's the momentum and keeping a team moving where the hard work really is, in my view. The fun part is the assessment, discovering a team's purpose and all the great things we're going to do together and how we want to work together. The devil is in the details of actually the discipline week after week, month after month, to actually march down through cycles to actually accomplish something amazing together. And that's a lot more of a human, the process of change and resistance and breaking through and getting stuck and all that, which, technology probably can help as well, but where maybe a human being like us can really be the differentiator. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just finished a course of MIT on artificial intelligence and business strategy. And one of the insights that I got, that is nothing new, but for me was kind of like really specific where we are going and what the impact is, how we partner with machine, how we open our mind and we become compassionate and empathetic to be able to work with machines and deliver the information that is required in order for the effective partnership. And I think that's the next level, and it covers up the comment of Lori Banks, actually Carmen Action, about team coaching approaches, tools, and AI impact for the future. What Lori wants to know, Lori Banks, I want to know what is popular, what is needed, and what is on the fringe. I'd like to prepare for a new paradigm shift. I think
about team coaching or about technology or both, or what?
I think both would be great.
Okay. So, I think on the immediately right now, I think what's needed is to, teams have made the transition, for better or for worse, to digital now, 4 or 5 months. Some teams are already working comfortably that way, but now it's like 100% digital. So obviously, really as team coaches getting comfortable working with Zoom and Mural or 1 or 2 or 3 of these technologies. I've had to learn how to use all of the platforms, right? Like WebEx and Adobe Connect and Blue Jeans and Google Hangouts. Once you learn a couple of these things, they're all pretty much similar, right? So I don't think that's too hard. Learn Mural. You don't need to take a class. Just start playing with it, and in a couple of days, you'll be able to do, and you'll learn, you'll trial and error learn. So don't, perfection's the enemy of the very good. So I think those 2 right now are game changers, but I think the mindset shift is, and I take this up, I introduced David Peterson, the head of coaching from Google, a number of years ago at the Columbia Coaching Conference. And one of the things he said is, because, you know, he's inside of Google and he's seeing the
Yeah.
AI stuff exploding. He said, as coaches, if we're going to be relevant moving forward, we have to learn how to create twice the value in half the time for half the cost. Right. And so I think
Very
in
good
some ways,
formula.
yeah, I think COVID has really challenged us to learn how do we create value in 45 minutes, in 60 minutes, in 90 minutes with a team. And I think this is really great practice for us, because if we can make the pivot to coaching a team in 6 sessions, 90 minutes, 45 minutes, using Mural and Zoom, and we can actually in 6 weeks or 4 weeks help a team fundamentally pivot and get on the right trajectory, that's a huge, in my view, shift from where at least I was even a year ago, where I would go in and interview everybody. It would take days, a week or two. I would meet with the team leader, do a feedback session, do a 1-day or 2-day team launch. And then, like it was drawn out in months. I think I'm now doing things in 4 to 6 weeks that I was spending the luxury of 3 months or 4 months to do back in the day, only 6 months or a year ago. Right. So I would say that's part of the inner work we need to do, is to get comfortable moving faster, more frequent, shorter. How do we create safety in 5 minutes or 10 minutes to create presence and get people ready, and then really have engaging sessions that pop, add value, and just break that down into iterations and start working in 2-week cycles. I think that's where, if you've been familiar with any of the agile practices and visual management, like with Kanban, is really going to help you a lot. And if you don't know what those things are, I think you need to learn those ASAP.
Yeah.
My mind has shifted now into the scaling of teams. And so the agile world has been kind of on this for a while, but team of teams, like how do we move to working with a cluster of 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 teams in a larger department? And so that's kind of some of the stuff that's got me excited. So I think if it's in the team space, you need to move from one team to multiple teams. I think you have time on that, but I think within 5 years, multi-team interventions are going to be more where we are now around individual teams for most of us, right? It's going to be multi-team interventions. And interestingly, I think this is where data and AI and all that starts to come in. Like in the 6 conditions, we have one energy company where we've run about 200 team diagnostic surveys. And now we've been building an organizational dashboard that looks at data across 200 teams. And we're correlating that data. Their internal researchers now have linked up all of this data on these 200 teams to outcomes like engagement, safety, operational excellence, psychological safety. And we're seeing wicked strong changes, that a small change in the 6 conditions in a team results in big effects on these organizational outcomes. And so I think what's exciting now is, as more and more people are pouring into team coaching, more and more teams are getting measured using various instruments. We're going to start to develop a database which will allow technology and bigger data analyses to enable a level of scientific support, which I think up to now has been largely anecdotal. We're going to be having on the 6 Conditions podcast, the folks at the energy company that we want to interview are getting the approvals, but we're going to be talking about this internal research study. But I think that's going to be exciting, because if we start to move to teams becoming the fundamental unit of analysis, not the individual. Most organizations the last 100 years have been organized around the individual. As we move to the team as the fundamental unit, measurement takes on a whole new ball game, new interventions, new things become possible. And we will up our game in terms of how do we actually not come in and do training for everybody, but we come in and launch a team of teams in a division to, spark a shift, in real organizational effectiveness and agility. And that starts to get to business agility and organizational agility, not just one team being agile, right?
Absolutely. And it's tied to rewarding the whole team versus individuals and the teams, and how you make this happen, and the new understanding of high performance, what we will put on the table to have this collective overview of team of teams and as a whole ecosystem in the organizational setting. one last question, which is going to bring us to closure, which is great.
Yeah.
Jessica McNicholson, she
Yeah,
said,
hey Jessica, good to see
hi,
you.
she's your
Hey,
friend,
Jessica.
obviously. And
Yeah.
she said, hi, I like you. I'm loving virtual team coaching, but also wondering about what technology can't replicate.
Mm. Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think there is something about the three-dimensional part of life, emotion, that we're kind of, I think, we can still work emotions and feel a little bit of emotions virtually, but it's not the same. So I think there's something about the three-dimensionality that's a little bit harder, and I think it makes it more challenging for us as team coaches to try to read the room in a Zoom call, and where a lot of the signals or things that we can feel are muted in some way virtually. And maybe once we get, once you have 100 teams under your belt virtually, maybe you'll be more attuned to the signals to pick up on the kinds of things that you can just feel in your body when you're sitting with a group together that may be harder to feel. So I kind of feel like that's some of it. Yeah, I think that's some of it. I mean, again, I almost feel like, 90% of what we do in person, we can still do now virtually. So, yeah, I've been kind of pondering that. I don't have simple answers, but I think, my energy seems to go to the emotional part. There could be something around engagement. But even with that, I think if we get creative, we can have really dynamic sessions together. There may be some subconscious things that I think we've seen, a lot of people just being cooped up at home all the time is leading to really outbursts of anger. We have like out of control partying in the US which is spreading COVID because I think people were locked down for so long. So I think there is something around maybe the physical and emotional side of who we are that, again, gets a bit too muted in the virtual setting. And I'm wondering, how far we can go just 100% digital. One of the things that has been beautiful for me is I've gone to, it's interesting. Today we started off this call, nature, shut off my power and my internet. And, nature is this great stakeholder. And maybe COVID, if we go back to where did COVID happen, is it because we're out of balance with nature? But even before this, I started bringing, with some others in the field, people out onto the ocean on a Dutch tall ship for these experiences to get back to nature, to get back to not being online and on our technologies all the time. And those were game-changing experiences for anybody who's been on those voyages. We call them the Nautilus voyages. Once people were off their devices for 3 days, people would keep looking at their phones for 3 days, even though there was no cell phone coverage. It took people 3 days to let go of their technology, but a level of human connection and people stepping up to their boldness, being out in the ocean, learning how to sail this big ship. Many people didn't have any backgrounds. I think was really interesting to see how far people came in that environment in 9 days or 7 days, which I don't think they're going to be able to accomplish in 6 months or a year virtually. Right. So it's kind of different. And that was like a real experience in transformation and like total immersion. And I don't know if I don't think we're gonna be able to replicate those things virtually. Right. So there may be something there that the amount of transformation we can create virtually may be different than, going on a ship or going off somewhere physically in nature. Where you're totally disconnected from technology opens up other kinds of learning transformations. But anyways, those are a couple of musings. I don't know if that answers the question or not. But,
Amazing closure, I think. I think that there are always pros and cons in any situation, and the experience is different. So why not in the future, when we can have in person, we will definitely have this, and we will lean to in-personal experience. That's not going to be that's not a question. It's just be open to learn and try for more, and the faster you are, the more successful you'll be. Thank you for the opportunity. Time's up. Please join me in October, where I will have Lori Mazan, the co-founder of Sounding Board, joining me for a very interesting conversation, again, around the topic of technology and coaching. Thank you, Krister. Great pleasure, everybody in Lenore, for the opportunity again, and looking forward to serve the community in October. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Vanya, a pleasure to be here. Thank you, ICF, Orange County. Thanks, everybody, coming today.
Thank you,
Great to be with
Krister.
you.
That was a ton of wonderful information. Now I have to start searching and figuring out Kanban, Mural, and all of these
Plenty
team
to keep you
diagnostic
busy.
surveys. Yes, you're going to keep us busy for the month of August. Thank you.
Exactly. All
Vanya,
right.
thank you. Thank you for keeping us current and relevant.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Oh,
have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Al.